Okay, so we're going to graph the function y equals 3 to the negative x. Now you could graph this using a reflection, but let's graph this though. Let's see if we can graph it without using reflections and transformations. Now if you have 3 to the negative x, right? Notice this is 1 over 3 to the x. That's our basic laws of exponents. This is also the same thing as 1 to the x over 3 to the x. As we know, 1 to any power is 1, and so we get 1 over 3 raised to the x. So really then, we have an exponential function, namely we have y is a to the x, where a in this case is 1 over 3, is less than 1, and greater than 0. So we know what the graph has to look like. It's going to look something like this. Now let's see if we can actually sketch a graph that's better than this. Okay, so as before, let's get some points. So if we take x to be negative 1, then y is 3 to the negative 1. But that's 3. Double negative becomes a positive, which is 3. Good. When x is 0, well, 3 to the negative 0 is 3 to the 0, which of course is just 1. And at 1, we have 3 to the negative 1, which from here, this line becomes 1 over 3. So we have our points, negative 1, 3, 0, 1, and we have 1, 1 over 3. So with those, we can now make a better graph. So we have 0, x is 1, here's negative 1, here's 3, 2, 1. So at 1, we're going to have a third, so I'm going to put that between 0 and 1. At 0, we get 1, negative 1, we get 3. So the graph is going to look something like this. And again, this is when we have an exponential function. When the base is positive and less than 1, we can see this from the graph, but we also have y equals 0, which is the x-axis, is the horizontal asymptote. Good. All right, so here, now what we're going to do is we're going to graph this function, y equals 2 to the x minus 1. Now notice right away that if we take f of x to be 2 to the x, then we really have y is f of x minus 1. In other words, we're going to take the graph of f and shift it down 1 unit vertically. Okay, so that's what we're going to have. Now, as before, it's good to get 3 points since we are involved with an exponential function. Here's x and here's y. So at negative 1, what are we going to get? We're going to get 2 to the negative 1 minus 1. Now, 2 to the negative 1 is 1 over 2. So we have 1 over 2 minus 1, which is negative. Let's just do some erasing. Negative 1 over 2. So that tells us we have the point negative 1, negative 1 over 2. At 0, we have 2 to the 0 minus 1. 2 to the 0 is 1. So we have 1 minus 1, which is 0. So the origin is on the graph. And at 1, 2 to the 1, we have minus 1, which is 2 minus 1, which is 1. So 1, 1 is also on the graph. So if we were to graph this, again, we're going to shift the graph of 2 to the x down 1 unit. So at 0, we have 0, 1, 1. At negative 1, we have negative a half, which is about here. So the graph is going to do something like this. Something like that. And now I should also point out that if we took the x-axis, y equals 0, that's going to shift down to y equals -1. Because again, we're looking at the graph of y equals 2 to the x minus 1. Now, why do we care about that? Well, hopefully you can see from the graph that if we let x go to minus infinity, what happens is 2 to the x we know is going to go to 0. So 2 to the x minus 1, that's going to go to 0 minus 1, which is minus 1. Excuse me. And what I'm trying to show you, hopefully you can see from the graph, that y equals -1 is now a horizontal asymptote. Again, so let me say that again. Since we have 2 to the x minus 1, we know that 2 to the x alone, that's going to go to 0 as x goes to minus infinity. So 2 to the x minus 1, that's going to go to 0 minus 1, which is -1. Let me get rid of this. And that's as x, goes to negative infinity. So again, y equals -1 is now a horizontal asymptote.